Welcome to Two Homes. This podcast explores the relationship between our inner world and the systems we live within, from our bodies and beliefs to the businesses, destinations, and environments we shape. Because sustainability that isn't embodied doesn't last, and well-being that stays at the surface level doesn't change much at all. Together, we'll explore what it really takes to build systems that support people, places, and the planet over the long term. From leadership and organizational culture to the hidden patterns that shape how we live, work, and travel. This is an invitation to look a little deeper and to discover how meaningful change often starts closer to home than we think. Welcome to the very first episode of Two Homes. If you're working in tourism or implementing sustainability and wanting to understand what really makes things stick, then you're in the right place. This is where policy documents become operationalized, certificates are like an ingredients list of what's actually inside the product, and sustainability at work becomes interesting and fun and not something that's at the bottom of the to-do list. And that's definitely something I think is not talked about enough in this space. Is it can be really motivating and fun. I see a lot of people get bogged down in the frustration, in the frustration of things not moving quickly enough, of people not getting it, of people not being able to segregate their waste properly, and it doesn't have to be so damn heavy. And so that's part of what we're going to be talking about here in Two Homes. But before we get into those wonderful nitty-gritty things, I do want to share what Two Homes is about, why I've created this podcast, what this space is for. Because here in Two Homes, we are going to look at how caring for the planet starts with understanding ourselves, how personal regulation, courage, and coherence shape the systems that we create. And I'm thinking more and more about systems these days, and we will dive into that as well. So this is a space where we can think differently. Let's take the lid off limitations. Let's feel differently. Let's build differently, inside and out. What's really pulled this together, this idea of the Two Homes podcast, has been kicking around for a little while, waiting for the right time to be brought into the world. And the big part of that has been learning about the body and our nervous system. And I'm seeing more and more just how much this plays out in organizations. In fact, I was talking to a friend on the weekend. She's now applying family constellation therapy into the workforce. And that's kind of cool. It really speaks to me about what I've been noticing myself. Everything that we as individuals bring to organizations is part of who we are. That old approach of leave your emotions at the door, you're here to work. It was a little naive, I think, that we can separate ourselves like that. And in a lot of ways, organizations are still working like that, that there's no space for the wholeness of people. And yet, I think as we move into the future, our emotional intelligence and our whole people are actually our superpowers. Other skills that we bring to the table, the very essence of who we are actually some of our biggest strengths. However, when they're running in the subconscious, which so much of how we show up in the world is from our subconscious operating system, then we can sometimes get frustrated and confused as to why things actually are how they are in the world. So we're going to unpack that a little bit. We're going to look at how busyness as a badge of honor is what actually disconnects us, and how groundedness is the space where we can connect more deeply, more meaningfully. So, without diving into too much theory and technical reasons for this, I'm going to share some of my journey so far. This is how I've come to this point, the shifts and the adventures along the way that have made me realize what now seems like just so incredibly clear. I was working in tourism back in Adelaide, my hometown, and really hit a turning point around 2012. And this really speaks to nervous system regulation. I was busy like every normal Aussie, getting up, hustling, working too many hours in the day, trying to get everything done immediately, every day, leaving, stressing, not sleeping well, rinse and repeat, day after day. And in that year, I'd been working on an event and had really just gone a little bit too far in trying to protect my team from the excess of what was required during that event, but in doing so, took way too much on myself and led to some major burnout. It was at a yoga retreat, actually, the very beginning, a few minutes in, my yoga teacher had said, okay, everyone, just chill out. We can't check into the rooms yet. I've got to organize some stuff. If you can just, hang out and um, enjoy the scenery for a little bit while I get set up. And so I put myself into a hammock and I just sat still. And it's amazing how when we sit still, things come to us. And it was like a lightning bolt, no kidding. I had this flash of recognition from when I'd been studying masters in tourism management about the different subjects around sustainable tourism that had really lit me up. And it was like, whoa, hang on. That's what I was meant to be doing. That's what I meant to be doing. And from that point on, things really shifted. Not in an overnight way. I didn't suddenly get up and start doing what I'm doing here, but in a very iterative way. And that revelation led me to first taking another job and moving to Sydney, where I worked with the kind of people who understood what it meant, understood what sustainable travel meant, in particular, one of the directors of the company, but also understood what it meant to work in flow, to trust your team, empower your team. And it was probably one of the first times I worked for people who weren't watching the clock. I also knew at that point, having spent some time traveling in Southeast Asia, that what I was looking for, I wasn't necessarily finding in Australia. So I'd cast the net a bit wider, and that ultimately took me to moving to Cambodia, where I had met with the director of an NGO who were focused on connecting travelers with meaningful experiences and helping them to do better while they were on the ground in Siem Reap, to guide them to making a more positive impact, a more positive footprint while they're there. Travelers are going to keep going to Cambodia. I mean, it's beautiful, and I have such a love for that place and such gratitude too, because that was where stepping out of the capitalistic rat race really gave me the space to breathe and to dive even deeper into that feeling that I had in the hammock of, I'm here to deliver something much more meaningful, much more supportive of this industry. I love tourism and travel, and I have for as long as I can remember. However, when we bring a little bit of intention and mindfulness into the picture, it becomes even more connecting, even more valuable. It's not about getting stamps in your passport, but it's about experiences and memory creating. And it's truly magnificent. However, the systems that are set up don't necessarily support the very environments that people are coming to visit. And there are so many fascinating parts of this that have come up along the way where people would talk to me about the work I was doing in Cambodia. So, following fantastic learning adventure working at that NGO is when I began Plastic Free Southeast Asia. My business used to be called Plastic Free Cambodia. I had the space to do that, and so many people would comment that, wow, like, yeah, Southeast Asia, what a hard place to do that. But actually, it was a beautiful place to do that. And I see a lot of projection from Western countries, Australia in particular, obviously, as my home country, projected out there where it's this perception that Southeast Asia is dirty, and yet dirty and wasteful are not the same things. More on that later. So I began Plastic Free Cambodia, later to be Plastic Free Southeast Asia, and of course Australia. And one of the most beautiful things about sharing this work is watching how people connect and light up and realize that there are better ways to do things and that they know what some of those better ways are. It was about, and my work continues to be about, bringing the best out in the people in the room. It's not that I necessarily know the best way, it's that collectively we can change things. And collectively is a lot more fun. Back to that, but it's a lot more fun to do it together than it is when it becomes one person's job. And again, I'm refraining from going down the multitude of rabbit holes. We will get there. That's why there needs to be a whole podcast for this. So things were fantastic. Things were going super well. Southeast Asia, the businesses, the people that I worked with in Southeast Asia continued to inspire me. We were off to a great start, and I also felt this sense of responsibility of, as an Australian, how do I bring this same sentiment, energy, optimism into the Australian market? And so at the end of 2019, I moved to Sydney. Why Sydney? Well, Sydney is really full of accessible nature, and that really spoke to me. And it also had a lot more advocates than I could find, a lot more people working in this space of sustainability, reducing single use plastics, sustainable fashion, like so many of these things. I felt like there were more of my people in Sydney than in my hometown. As we all know, 2020 was a game changer for the whole world. And for me in particular, because this was my experience, it was brutal. I'd just moved to Sydney. I was full of hope. The bushfires in late 2019, I felt had been such a wake-up call, and that more people were prepared to take drastic, immediate action on sustainability. However, March 2020 undid all of that. In fact, I think it set us back quite a long way. As someone working in sustainability, in tourism, in a new city, without friends or family physically around, this was really, really hard. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was actually starting to learn about nervous system regulation at that point, where I thought I was failing. I was actually building a really resilient system within myself. And that came through movement and education. And one of the other things that I really realized from that time, that initial time in Cambodia, is that awareness and education aren't the same thing. Back to that dichotomy between Australia and Southeast Asia, Aussies thinking that Southeast Asia was a harder place to reduce plastics, but actually it being the other way around. There was also this sense, like a lot of people in Southeast Asia would say, oh, well, like Australians have a lot more education. But it's not about the education. It's not the same thing because, yes, okay, maybe through formal channels, through schools and universities, Australians do have a lot more education at our fingertips. But awareness is the thing that shifts the behaviour around single-use plastic consumption and litter and waste management and all of the things that flow on from that. So it wasn't information so much that was the barrier, but the integration that was. So back to 2020, what I also now see is that it's not just information, right? It's not just information. Part of it's awareness, but a third part of it is bringing it into the nervous system, bringing it into our operating systems, to then extend that to look at it as a business level. Like we have operating systems in businesses, we have operating systems in ourselves, and most of them are subconscious. So what I learnt was that by myself learning, and I became, well, even before then, but I was becoming and then solidifying during 2020, 2021, a voracious listener of podcasts. So, I've got some really big shoes to fill, like a lot of aspirational speakers that I look up to, whose podcasts I've listened to, who I enjoy getting those aha moments from. That combined with walking, which I did a lot of because there wasn't much else to do, and dance, which I started, I'd always been so afraid to. They really helped with my neuroplasticity. They help with my nervous system regulation. They've helped me become more flexible in how I think. This is mind-body integration. And that's the gift that I got from that really difficult time. 2022, when we could travel again, I went straight back to Southeast Asia. And this is another signal that I can now see. My nervous system was seeking safety. That move to Australia had not supported safety in my nervous system. So leaving again and going back to the last place where I felt safe is actually like a really logical move. So we did that. I tried to balance the two for a couple of years, but just felt more and more disconnected. By the time I'd get settled in my rhythm in Southeast Asia, I was moving back to Australia. By the time I got my rhythm settled in Australia, I was moving back to Southeast Asia. So as glamorous as it sounds to have two homes like that, it wasn't really working for me. So 2 years ago, I committed to Sydney as my home. And of course, I visit home number 2 as often as I can. So that is another part of the two homes ecosystem. During those 2 years of coming and going, I realized that our perspective, the way we view things, changes what we normalize. I would notice things when I came back to Australia that I hadn't seen before and that people around me didn't seem to be aware of. Likewise, being away from Southeast Asia and going back, I would notice things that other people hadn't seemed to realize. And especially when we're talking about sustainability, the industry really often feels like we're not doing enough. We need to push harder. It's not quick enough. However, when we change our perspective and see how far we've come, how far in the last 10 years things have actually shifted, I think that is a place to recognize that we have made progress. In the industry, in the respective countries, and in us as individuals, things have shifted. And so stepping back and taking a big picture view of that really does help to see that there has been progress. There is still more needed. I do still get frustrated that things seem to be going at a sometimes glacial pace, but they're going, and that's really important. So whether you've lived in other places or visited other places, these are great opportunities to review, to see things differently, and maybe to even start behaving differently. But it's so hard to see these patterns from the inside. And I notice this in the industries that I'm working in. That some of the patterns that are playing out in the hotel sector, there's a lot of momentum towards certification. There's a sustainability policy on the website. There's a towel policy card on the bed when you check in. And it's hard to see from inside those systems, perhaps, where they're not working as they're intended to. Behind the room door is not the same as what is written on the piece of paper. Sustainability is frequently used as an add-on, and technical decisions like policy making don't translate into human decisions. The real shift is when we integrate this into the entire system. Because when it's just an add-on, what I see is usually one person or a very small amount of people carrying the weight of it, absorbing the aspiration and the authority, and then feeling frustrated when it's not quite landing the way that they wanted to. Most of my clients, if not all, have been extremely passionate. They can see the bigger picture. They want to leave things better than they found them. And they've implemented a lot of initiatives. But the game changer, where the magic lies, is when they're integrating this message into their day-to-day operations as well. And this is the flow. This is where we go next. There's nothing wrong with where we're at. There's nothing wrong with where we're at. It's part of the process. And I think that there's a lot of feeling behind sustainability that is, we've been doing things wrong for so long. The new way, the next thing we do should be perfect. And that's not realistic. So we need to flow with the iterations. And I believe the next iteration of sustainability is embodiment, is embedding it into how we do things day to day. It's where the things that are written on those policies, the meaning behind those certificates is actually known and cared about and acted upon in day-to-day operations. It's shared and it's understood by everybody in the business. There's a collective understanding of why it's important, which results in a collective commitment in seeing it come through. What I've seen time and again is sustainability initiatives that are fantastic, that have been really, really thoroughly applied. But that when the person who's been leading that leaves the organization, everything falls back. Everything unravels. Everything goes back to the system. It goes back to the system that was there before. or perhaps the system that the new leader was operating in at a different property. And when everybody in the industry, or the majority in the industry, are doing things a certain way, it's hard to rely on one person to make these changes, to ensure that they're leaving a legacy that sticks. What I have seen and continue to look for is examples where this has really been integrated, where I know that if the leader stepped away tomorrow, that these practices would be carried forward. Because it's not about the ego, it's about integrating it into the system. And this is truly where we're going. And when I say I'm looking for this, I'm looking for this more and more, because what we look for is what we'll find. And I want to see the hope, I want to see the potential, and I want to see it coming into action. So, with two hotels that I've worked with in Cambodia who I feel really, really get this. And I'm so grateful to have been part of that conversation and to help them with various aspects of that journey. There are many more, of course, but I feel like these two particular ones really got it. Their initiatives weren't coming from a place of ego; they were coming from a place of inclusivity. And one in particular had I don't know if it was a written policy, but an unwritten policy that she hired people based on their attitude, not based on whether they'd done the job before, because her belief is that you can teach people skills, but you can't teach people attitude. And she involved the entire team into the sustainability journey. They had a directive from the get-go that they were opening their doors and they were going to be plastic free. And they opened their doors and they were plastic free front of house. But back of house, they had a big problem. And that's where the team came in and did the heavy lifting so that she didn't have to, so that it wasn't one person's job, that it was a collective job. And to this day, years later, I think we worked together first in 2017. Years later, it's really it's part of their operating system. It's part of how they do things. And when she's not there, it carries on being part of how they do things. And how I can tell these days when I go in, and even though there's a huge majority of staff who are still there, this is another amazing thing that we will talk about in a future episode, is the staff retention by being united on a common purpose. And I'm not saying this is the only one, but culture of an organization is massive. A lot of the staff, when I go back, even now, are the same staff. And there are some new staff as well. Those new staff are able to pick up that conversation. They're able to pick up that thread. They're able to talk to me about sustainability without even really knowing who I am. And that to me really shows how much that's been incorporated. A couple of weeks ago, I was at an event and everyone is, asking who we are, who are you, what do you do, what kind of work do you do? And of course, we're talking about sustainability. And what I realized a short moment later is I was talking to the head of sustainability for this company. I was like, wow, great. Okay. Like, you know what I'm talking about. And she's like, yeah, we just got our B Corp certification. I'm like, congratulations. And her response was, well, it was a team effort. And that was when I lent in. I'm like, tell me more. And as the event went on and I met more and more members of the team, I gently probed that. I'm like, hey, like, tell me about this. I know that you're doing this, that you're doing that. And all of them could talk about it. They all understood why it was important. And what was also refreshing was they're like, oh, well, it's not perfect. Not in a defensive way. I've definitely seen that over the years, not in a defensive way, but in a pragmatic way. And that is the thing about embodied sustainability, is it doesn't mean everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that it's zero waste, net zero, carbon neutral, any of the other terms that you want to wrap around it. It means that it's with integrity, that their policies and their actions match, their certificates and their actions match. This is the difference. When it's shared and understood by everyone, it flows. There's no scramble when it comes to recertification time. There's no scramble when it comes to external auditing. It's a gentle knowing that everything is in hand, that problems are addressed as they come up, things are tweaked along the way. Let's look back at hotels again, because this is an area that I've worked in extensively. There are some visible sustainability markers that really matter. Refillable water bottles, being able to refill a carafe of water in the hotel. Procurement shifts, little indications that local, sustainable, ethical, environmental products are in use, and waste policies that are acted on. But mostly what I look for is, like that example at the event that I just mentioned, is the cultural literacy. Can frontline staff explain why something exists, why it's done that way? The hotel in Cambodia, where I can get my drink bottle refilled and have the staff proudly tell me that, yeah, this is just something they do. They offer it, there's no friction, it's not hard, there's no shame. It's just like, yes, we encourage you to do that because we don't have any plastic water bottles here. They know why. They know that they're protecting the environment of the place that they live in. So that is one part. The other thing is, can people feel safe raising concerns? If they see something is not quite right, oh my gosh, you're right, there is a single-use cup here. I wonder how that got here. Let me go have a chat. That means that there's no fear of retribution for bringing something up. There's no shame associated with the single use. It's more like, that's interesting. Let's go check it out. Curiosity is amazing. And as briefly touched on, if the management change or if the sustainability person changes, do the initiatives last? Do they survive and carry on into the next iteration, or do they fall away? When it's possible for a housekeeper to explain not just the policy and the purpose, then that's when I know it's not just a written policy, it's a lived policy. That's when I know it's embedded. When I travel for work, I am often talking to the housekeeping staff about water, about towels, about all of these things. And there are just a few examples where I can see that this is incorporated, and many others where it's a little disconnected, a little disengaged. So, how do we get to that place of embodiment? How do we get to that place where it is what's written on paper is what's happening in reality? It happens when staff are trained. Yes, I did say that knowledge isn't everything, but it is something. So, knowledge is a foundation. It happens when staff are empowered. Are they part of the decision-making process? Are they able to act? And are they looped in on the why? Also, is leadership modeling the behavior? It's not a do as I say, not as I do situation. Who else grew up with that kind of framing? But it's like, I lead this way, this is the norm setting, and we do it this way as well. And it's also woven into narrative. There's a sense of meaning, there's a sense of reason why protecting our communities, our families, our environment, our health, our guests. This is all part of making it an embedded way of doing things. And that those staff, the very staff that are there working in the business day to day, are invited to shape these directives. That gives them a sense of agency and a sense of involvement, and definitely a sense of buy-in. It's one thing to tell people what to do. It's another thing to invite them to be part of determining what that thing to do is. When staff are involved in shaping the sustainability practices, not just executing them, it ties directly to agency. And more importantly, it ties to governance. That's where what's written on paper is what's happening in reality. And that is largely what this Two Homes ecosystem is about. How do we connect the inner home with the outer home? So when I'm assessing sustainability in a business, I'm looking at whether it's structurally integrated. So are there those cues, water bottles, towel signage, etc.? Is it culturally understood and participatory? Do the staff know? Is what's happening on paper happening in reality? And will it survive with a leadership change? And so what if we were measuring success in tourism not just by room nights, not just by occupancy, but what about different metrics? What about higher yield, lower carbon, value stays? How much value can we bring into the local economy? It used to be back in the early days of my studies. They were the late 90s and again 2007, 2008. I did some more. How much value stays in the economy, the local economy? This used to be normal. This used to ripple through the economy. And I wonder now how much of it does with our global trade, with online buying behavior, with trying to get the cheapest options, not necessarily the best quality options. How much of that revenue is still staying? What if that was a KPI? How would that look? Staff turnover. What if our staff were embedded in the organization, not just workers, but actually part of the team, part of driving decisions, part of the feedback loop in terms of what they see, how they work? How do we make that easier? How do we reward staff and make them feel important and integral? Because they are. What would that look like? It might seem like, oh, well, how are we going to add sustainability in? It's so busy. Everyone is so busy. What if investing a little bit more time now actually saved you time in the long run? Instead of needing to react and reinvent every time an audit comes around, every time a certification renewal comes around. But what if actually slowing down sped things up in the long run? I spoke with an amazing company a couple of years ago, and they'd done just this, not just around sustainability, but around their whole operations. Every single day, the entire company stopped for 5 minutes, maybe 10, and they talk about what would make their work better. They share ideas. The ones that stick, they operationalize them, and it has created huge increases in their revenue. They've tracked it back. Suggestions that come up from this 10-minute pause. When we slow down, even for a short amount of time, we start to ground, center, think clearly, operate from a place of nervous system regulation, and come up with ideas that we wouldn't have come up with if we were continually staying busy and distracted. So how do we get out of survival mode and into creating better systems that support our outcomes and objectives more seamlessly, more effectively? So the first step is awareness. The second is staff engagement. Once we take ourselves out of survival mode and into awareness, then it's really important to engage the rest of the team around us. And through that engagement, ideas, solutions, a shared sense of purpose, a shared sense of responsibility, and most importantly, a shared sense of pride in what you're creating. And the final step is changing the system. And that can only happen after awareness and engagement are in place. Then the system changes and things move in a direction more solidly than before, more sustainably than before. Thank you for joining me for this very first episode of Two Homes. This is where we talk about more than just the places we live. One home is the body, our nervous system, our beliefs, and the way we relate to ourselves and the world around us. And the other is the planet, the systems we build, the businesses we run, the destinations we shape, and the environments we depend on. And what I've come to see through my work in sustainability and tourism is that these two homes are never separate. The way we think and the way we make decisions and show up in our work are all part of the systems we create. This podcast is about exploring that connection, looking at sustainability not just as a technical challenge, but as a human one. And over the coming episodes, we'll explore what that means in practice, in leadership, in tourism, in organizations, and in the everyday choices that shape the world around us. Because meaningful change doesn't begin somewhere out there, it usually starts a little closer to home. I'm your host, Sarah Rhodes, and I'll see you next time on Two Homes.